Welcome, everyone. Isn't it nice to be in person instead of on Zoom? Well, I'm Tim Nutt, director of the UAMS Historical Research Center, which is the archives division of the UAMS library. And so we preserve the history, the institutional record of UAMS, as well as the history of the health sciences throughout Arkansas. And we're the only archives in the state that does that. We're located on the 5th floor in the library. I'd love for you to come up sometime. I'd show you our collection, our artifacts, our photographs, everything that we have, because we really do have a really unique collection. Glad to have you all here tonight. As I mentioned, the Historical Research Center is one of the sponsors of the program tonight. And the other one is the Society for the I messed it up. That's not good. Society for the History of Medicine and Health Professions, which is our very supportive Friends organization. And the society helps us, the Historical Research Center, in a number of ways. They buy materials for our collection, books and other archival materials, things like that. But then they also help us provide programming, such as this program tonight. And so we're really pleased to have such a supportive organization in the Society for the History of Medicine and Health Professions. In addition to programs like this, the Society and the Historical Research Center also has a monthly lecture series. It's the first Thursday of every month. It's called the Stay at Home Lecture. We started it at the beginning of the pandemic, so many years ago. And it's still going on. So if you're interested, there's a sign-up sheet over by the door. If you're interested in receiving emails about further or additional programming, future programming, please feel free to sign up. And we won't spam your email or anything like that, but we will give you notifications about programming. And then also on the table is a membership form for the society, and we'd love to have you as a member. The memberships are very inexpensive, $15 for an individual, $5 if you're a student. So I hope you'll consider doing that. Before we begin tonight's event, and I want to say that this event has been a long time in the making. We started planning or talking about this event in 2019, and our goal was to have it in 2020, which would have been the 50th anniversary of the founding of the clinic. Unfortunately, life intervened, and so we're just now able to have this program, and I'm so glad that we finally got to this point. Before we begin, I'd like to thank a few people who have helped in shaping this program tonight. Of course, the panelists and the moderator you'll hear about here in a few minutes, but also my colleagues in the Historical Research Center and the UAMS Library. They all pitched in to make sure tonight goes smoothly. We're still at the very beginning, so I'm crossing my fingers that we still go smoothly by the end. But Suzanne Easley, Logan Whittington, and Jeffrey Stark in the Historical Research Center, and the interim library director, Libby Ingram, and Marty Hockaday, our assistant director of the library, really helped a lot. So if you would, please give them a round of applause. And I also want to thank the Society's Board of Trustees for their support in our programming efforts. If you used Parking Deck 1 when you arrived at campus, there are valet stubs over by the door. So if you'd like one to get out of the parking lot, parking is free on us tonight, so please feel free to grab one of those. So finally, tonight we are here to celebrate the legacy of the Little Rock Internal Medicine Clinic, founded in 1970 as the state's first integrated medical practice. What Raymond Miller, Hoyte Pyle, Bob Moore, and Jack Wagoner did as physicians was groundbreaking, and tonight I'm pleased to have you all here to learn more about this fascinating story. Dr. Joe Bates, Associate Director for Public Health Practice in the UAMS Fay Bozeman College of Public Health, will serve as moderator. Dr. Bates is well known in Arkansas medicine. Everyone probably knows Dr. Bates, but in case you don't, I'll just give you An additional example of his work, besides the College of Public Health, he also formerly served as the Deputy State Health Officer and Chief Science Officer with the Arkansas Department of Health. So we're pleased to have Dr. Bates here with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bates, who will introduce our panelists.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to sit and listen mostly to an oral history of 4 young men who abandoned caution and reason and ventured out into something that I wouldn't have considered doing. And they did it in a period where racism was very rampant. We're going to tell this story. It's going to be a happy story, but it's going to be some hurtful stories, and some that hit pretty close to home at this place. And we want to congratulate these remarkable people for what they faced and the courage they showed and what they did. Now, before I introduce them, I want to sort of set the scene of what was going on when they took on this adventure. This was in the late 1960s, and they opened their clinic in 1970. Racism in healthcare is part of our history. We might as well face it. And it's not unique to Arkansas, or certainly it's prevalent throughout the U.S. I'm going to give you some examples of just a few. World War II began in 1941, and the American Red Cross began to collect blood for the war effort. But they wouldn't accept blood from black people, only white people. That changed later on, but then if they did give blood from blacks and whites, it had to be labeled colored blood or white blood. And that continued for a long time. And it continued in Arkansas until the 1970s. 1970s. Another point, tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in Arkansas for most of the first half of the 20th century. They built a sanatorium for white people in 1910. It came to be the largest sanatorium in the United States. But black people weren't admitted, even though black people suffered a higher case rate than whites. There was no black facility for tuberculosis in Arkansas until 20 years later, in 1932. For many years in Arkansas, black people were not admitted to a hospital, a general hospital, no matter how sick they were. And then, after years passed, the hospitals were segregated. There was a white portion and a black portion. I graduated from this medical school in 1957. And we moved here in 1956 from the old medical school over there on McAlmont Street. That hospital was strictly segregated in 1956. When we moved here, like flipping a switch, it was completely integrated. And I'm very proud of that point. And there was no great upheaval about it that I know about. Arkansas was the first state medical school in the United States to admit black people. And that occurred in 1948. Edith Irby Jones, she became famous, you probably know about her, graduated in 1952. I might just show you some of the results that happened after that. There's no black people were admitted in 53, 2 in 54, 1 in 55, 1 in 56, 4 in 57, my class, and so on, trickling small amounts. One of the students in my class was Sam Kuntz. Sam was from Earl, Arkansas, way over on eastern part of Arkansas, a segregated black school. Went to college at AM&N at the time it was called. He was admitted, but he had struggled, and he failed a year and didn't graduate in my class. He graduated a year later. Then he was accepted at Stanford in the surgery program, stayed on at Stanford, and rose to the rank of full professor. He became nationally recognized as a transplant surgeon, became head of the Department of Surgery at Downstate Medical Center in New York, and from there he was elected president of the United States Academic Surgeons. Ray Miller has a story like that you'll hear. I took this advantage to tell you, I have to confess, I'm an affirmative action advocate in the strongest way. And I think about these experiences that I've seen, Sam Kuntz and Ray Miller, and I know it evidently our Supreme Court's going to find that affirmative action is not in the Constitution. It's not, even though our Constitution was written when the cattle slavery was every place, North and South, but affirmative action somehow is not permitted in our Constitution. That's what I predict. And I think that's a sad, sad story, and it's still a part of racist, if we think that Sam Kuntz and later to hear about Ray Miller start at the same starting point as the advantaged people do, well, it's just foolish and crazy. If we didn't have affirmative action, there probably wouldn't be a Sam Kuntz or a Ray Miller, and many more like them. Well, who are these heroes? I'm just going to tell you briefly about them, and more will come out as the story unfolds. Here on my immediate left is Dr. Hoyte Pyle. He was born and raised at Fort Smith, went to school at Fayetteville at the university, went to this medical school, trained in internal medicine, and then in renal physiology. Goes off to the military, served in the Navy for 2 years, and somewhere along in the Navy period, this idea sort of hatched in his mind about what's to do next. Ray Miller has passed on. He is going to be adequately substituted by his dear wife, Clarice Miller. I'll tell you briefly about Clarice. She's from Forest City, and she went to school at UAPB, became a school teacher, and she and Raymond Miller met and had a wonderful life. And one of her daughters, only daughter, Terry, is here someplace in the audience. Here she is, yes. She'll tell you about Raymond, but I'll tell you a little bit. He was born at Cotton Plant, Arkansas. Graduated from Cotton Plant Vocational School. Focused on how to drive a tractor and how to hook up the plow. He goes off on a scholarship to UAPB, AM&N at the time, I think he had an athletic scholarship or agriculture. Raymond had a whole flock of siblings, I think 7 or 8. You can tell how many, quite a few. He told me he had never seen a physician in his life, not even one time, until he got to UAPB, and he was sort of the water boy for the football team. And here comes a doctor to examine the team. And somehow they met. And they bonded, and this doctor, she'll tell you about it, encouraged him to go to medical school, and he did. Well, he had some trials with that, and I'll let you tell the trials. But he obviously graduated and trained in internal medicine. Again, that was a trial. Getting that happened. I want you to tell also about the rotating internship and his original interest in OBGYN, okay? I'm giving her lots of assignments. But he went on to have a remarkable career, but unfortunately he died too early. And the other member of this team, Dr. Jack Wagoner, is also passed on. And he died at age 79. He was born at Earle, Arkansas. But I think he spent most of his formative years in Oklahoma. Went to school at Fayetteville. Went to this medical school where he graduated in '63. Trained in internal medicine and pulmonary disease. Raymond also trained in pulmonary disease. And he teamed up, and you'll hear the story, with these others. It's worth noting that all 4 of them went to the military. Hoyte in the Navy. Oh, I've got to tell about Bob Moore. I've left you out.
That's all right.
Bob Moore was born in Little Rock. He went to Vanderbilt, graduated from Harvard Medical School, came here and trained in hematology, oncology, and internal medicine, and finished that training in 1970. He too went off to the Army, served his 2 years, and Jack Wagoner was in the Air Force. And Ray Miller was also in the Army. And so they were getting out of the Army all at the same time. And 4 young people, and here they come to Little Rock. And they didn't join a established clinic. All 4 of them, with wives and children, started a clinic from scratch. They had to buy the land. They had to borrow money for the building they were going to build. And they were going to have a racially integrated clinic in this setting. And that's what I want you to feel. Well, Hoyte, I think I'd like for you to begin. I will say Hoyte and Raymond were gross anatomy mates, first year medical school, and they bonded there. And I'll stop there, and you can tell how you and Raymond went along and how the germ of the idea that you would start an integrated clinic in Little Rock. How did that happen?
Well, I first met Dr. Raymond Miller in 1959 across the cadaver in gross anatomy. And he was one of 2 black students in my class. And we really, working that close together, got to be really good friends. Throughout medical school, we studied together. Our families got together when there was a little bit of time. We did a rotating internship at the University Medical Center together. We did our internal medicine residency together at the medical center, and then I went in the service. They were drafting doctors then out of their internship, but they let us do our specialty training if we would agree to go in for 2 years once we finished that. So I went in 1967. Raymond was a year later because he did a fellowship in pulmonary diseases before he went in the service. So anyway, I was stationed at Quantico, Virginia, and we kept in touch with each other over the years. And when a little before I got out of the service in 1969, I had Raymond and Clarice come down to our house in Quantico, Virginia, and we just kind of spent the day talking with each other. The ladies were in one room, and Raymond and I were in another. And after a while, I said, Raymond, I'd like for you to go into internal medicine practice with me in Little Rock. I want us to start a new group. And at first, he was kind of shocked. I think he thought I was just kidding him. But I had known Raymond now for 10 years. I knew what he was like. He was my best friend, and I didn't want to go into practice with anybody else other than him at that time. Well, we talked, and in a few minutes, he agreed to do it, and we were jumping up and down and shouting, and our wives came in and wanted to know what in the world was going on, and we told them that we had decided to go into practice together, and they were happy for us. And then we realized that we really needed more than 2 people. We didn't want to be taking call every other night, and we thought an ideal number might be 4 or 5. And so we had known Jack Wagoner because he was in our class in medical school, and I had known him anyway when he was younger because we went to church together before he moved out of Little Rock. So I knew him and what he was like, and Bob and I were kind of aware of each other. We knew each other, but not really close or anything. But he was recommended by some good doctor friends of mine, and he got a high recommendation. And when we asked him if he would join, I'm sure he talked with Norma and his family about it, but he graciously agreed to go into practice with us. Now, Jack was a different story. He wasn't sure that he wanted to go into an integrated practice at that time. And so I told Raymond about this. Now, Jack was in Little Rock and Raymond was still in Washington, D.C., so they couldn't talk face to face, but Raymond wrote Jack a letter, and I thought it was a fantastic letter, and I'd like to read that to you now. Hello, Jack. I had a talk with Hoyte last night and was informed of your indecision at the moment. For obvious reasons, there isn't really much I can say. As I see it, the association of the 4 of us could lead to 2 categories of problems. Number 1, ability, willingness, and desire to work together. And number 2, reaction to social pressures in the community. It would be ridiculous to anticipate problems in the former category. Surely you agree. As for the second category, this is more complex and a more far-reaching phenomenon. This gets into one's ideas and philosophies. Only a moron would anticipate that the community would overwhelmingly accept our association and present us with an armful of roses our first week in practice. However, I would be less than truthful if I did not point out, from my point of view, that in all likelihood, all of our anxieties and concerns about going into an integrated practice would be gone after about 6 months. I don't think that would be a problem. It really gets down to the question of whether or not one is willing to withstand community pressures. We probably agree that philosophically, this is stupid. But in reality, community feeling could be, to a large extent, determine how you're going to pay your grocery bill. I happen to feel that there are plenty of white people and black people of sound economic stability in Little Rock who will be pleased to see such a step and would support us without reservation. In fact, I would be less than honest to infer that they won't until they are given an opportunity. Regardless of how we all feel about the pluses and minuses, we're surely convinced that we know that such a step is morally and spiritually correct. I might point out that social sanctions in this endeavor are not unilateral. There are black friends of mine that strongly object to my becoming part of the practice. Perhaps my feeling can be a bit more vehement in this regard, however, because these friends didn't pay a bill for my education. And there are enough other blacks in Little Rock to occupy my time in my office. My primary concern is a pleasant, working relationship with you, Hoyte, and Bob, and simply being the type of physician that my training dictates. The target of resentment is not just a black doctor in the office, but the type of black doctor in the office. With the passage of time, I think this aspect will assume more significance. I'm not a Bostonian or a New Yorker. I've forgotten more about racial prejudices than many people will ever learn. I think I've been fairly successful in spotting and coping with dissatisfaction as it relates to racial disharmony. Jack, all I'm trying to say is that the situation is one of personal choice. I do feel obligated to emphasize that I would be most happy to work with you, and by the same token would feel no different toward you should you choose to do otherwise. To work with a black man in Little Rock is a sacrifice for you and your family to make. It was unheard of just 10 years ago. There was no one in a better position than myself to say, though, that today Little Rock is new. There's an integrated law practice. The University of Arkansas now recruits black athletes. Some of the assistant superintendent of schools in Little Rock is black, and the faculties are integrated. Things will and must continue to improve. The time for an integrated medical practice will never come until responsible people such as yourself make it a reality. Above all this, the fact is the group is quite compatible, and this is really the significant point. Right soon, Raymond.
I'd like to comment to set the stage there a little bit. This letter was primarily written for Jack Wagoner, and I'd like for you to tell Jack's father's advice about this.
You know, Jack and Lori had discussed this, and they had some concern about it, but I think the most concern they had was Jack's daddy told him that if he joined this practice, he would lose everything that he had ever worked for. So that really was a tough decision for Jack to make. But after he received Raymond's letter, he wrote him in a couple of days and said, "Dear Ray, thank you for your letter. I think you stated all the facts quite succinctly. Although Lori and I have had some misgivings about going into an integrated practice for obvious reasons, I have decided to give it a whirl. The overriding factor, of course, is that I want to be in a compatible group of people my own age, and I think the four of us fit that description. Now that the decision has been made, I'm looking forward to getting started. Well, we had our group formed then, and we knew that all of us were going to be unemployed in 12 months. Bob and Jack and myself were all doing fellowships and subspecialties of internal medicine, and Raymond had another year in Washington, D.C. So we had a lot we had to do in that amount of time. And we found a house that we could buy on Lee Avenue, a block east of University, and a lot that was vacant next to it. We hired a moving company to move the house and sold it to them. We knew that we had to get that area rezoned. And so we went to the Planning Commission. They recommended that it not be rezoned. But they presented it to the board, and my dad and I had actually gone and visited every family within 300-foot circumference of our office. And every one of them said that they were happy that we were coming, except one. And this lady was very vehement that she did not want that office to be there. In fact, she appeared before the city board and voiced her concerns there. But the city board overruled the Planning Commission and granted us E1 quiet business rezoning. Well, then we had to find an architect, and we used one of Jack's relatives, Tommy Adams, who drew up the plans for our buildings. We found Herb Davis, who had built medical offices before, and he did the construction on it. We got finance through the Arkansas Teacher Retirement System, both construction financing and permanent financing. And so we had the building built, and we opened our doors in October of 1970. That was all accomplished in 15 months. Today, you'd be lucky to get it rezoned in 15 months. But the Lord was with us. I think He wanted that practice to be established. And so we opened our doors then.
Let's move on now to business.
May I ask Hoyte to say how we got the finances?
How you want to talk about how do these guys unemployed get all this loans for a house, for a clinic, unemployed? What bank would loan you money? I don't understand. Hoyte, can you tell us? Hoyte's hearing is not the best.
Hearing is terrible.
How did you get this loan?
We got it through the teacher retirement system. My father happened to be the director of the teacher retirement system at that time. So that made it a little bit easier. And he was all for us. When I had mentioned to him that what Raymond and I were going to do, he said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" I said, "Yes, I am." And that settled it. Never raised anything after that. In fact, he was one of Raymond's first patients. But he agreed to give us the financing. He went through some difficult times after that. One of the state legislators found out that he had loaned this money to a group of doctors, and his son was one of those doctors. And this was Doug Brandon, and he really was against that and thought it was terrible that the teacher retirement system would lend their money that way. But it turned out to be a good investment for them. We actually paid them back early.
Clarice Miller, would you tell us a little bit of the early story on Raymond and one of the things, how he got in medical school and some of the trials there? I think he also wanted to go into OBGYN, and he applied for the residency here, and tell about that story.
Okay, I will. On November 26, 1936, Marion.
Closer.
I'll say that.
Closer to you.
Closer? Okay. It's on. It is on, isn't it? Maud and Marion Miller had a son, their 8th child. And Raymond was that son. He was the first of 4 boys. They eventually had 13 children. One died shortly after birth, so they left 12 that lived to adulthood. Cancer took most of them out, though. He grew up on a farm in eastern Arkansas, close to the tiny town of Cotton Plant, near Brinkley. Now, he told me and others that he was from Cotton Plant, and I didn't find out until a few years later that he actually was not. He was from, he grew up on a farm close to Cotton Plant. Now, Cotton Plant is very small. And in those years, people that came to college would say they were from the largest town close to where they really grew up. He attended primary school and graduated from Cotton Plant Vocational High School. Both were segregated in that era, underfunded. But I'd like to add that Raymond spoke very highly of 2 of his teachers. One was Babs, who has a son here in Little Rock. I think he's probably retired now in education, and Mr. Fawcett, that they were excellent teachers in a segregated system. An interesting and a bit hurtful incident he told me about on several occasions had to do with him while driving a school bus, stopped by the superintendent's house for some reason. I've forgotten what it was. Knocked on the door. The superintendent's wife came to the door and told him to go to the back door. Now, during those times and prior to that, blacks understood that they would go to the back door. You could not go to the front door. The irony of this story is, many years later, after Raymond became a doctor, he saw the superintendent as a patient on a consult, and the wife, smiling, said to him, "Are you one of those Millers from Cotton Plant?" And he said, "Yes." The difference in me and Raymond is I would have said, "Yes, you turned me away." He didn't. He let it go. He was only turned away because of his skin color. We lived through those times. Another incident, at some point, Raymond tried out and made the St. Louis Cardinals farm team, but chose to enter college. He entered AM&N then. It's now the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. After graduating high school, he went to AM&N on an agricultural scholarship. And the story he told me was that the head of the department put him in charge of planting a garden for the French professor. And he said, "I had planted a garden my whole life, and I didn't want to do that." And that's supposedly the reason he changed his mind. Now, Joe has another story that he met this doctor, and the doctor talked him into going into medicine. So he changed his major, gave up his scholarship, changed his major to pre-med, and worked in the cafeteria, I think as a sophomore. And then he ran for and was elected vice president of the Student Government Association in his junior and senior years, and that provided a scholarship. He was aggressive, to say the least. Raymond and I met when I entered AM&N in 1957. I'm a little old, as we all are really now, so I can't remember exactly when we met, but probably toward the end of freshman year. As I remembered, he applied to 2 medical schools. I'm not sure if he applied to others, but he was accepted at the University of Michigan first, very early. At that time, Arkansas didn't notify the entrance until April, and that was kind of late. I say that I sweated that out more than he did because by that time we were going to get married. If he had gone to Michigan, I don't think that would have happened. So he was accepted. Now, when he was interviewed, a psychologist, I'm told.
Interviewed where?
What?
In Arkansas. He was interviewed at.
Yeah, okay, I didn't add Arkansas. Okay. He was interviewed at Arkansas, and the interviewer interviewed him the entire time with his back to Raymond. And Raymond let things roll off his shoulders better than I could, though, but that got him. And I can't imagine how he survived, except that we all, when we had an issue, we just basically said, I'm going to show you. I'm going to do this. We married in June 1960. At the end of his freshman year in medical school and my junior year in college. Raymond and Hoyte Pyle met, and they've told this story already, and bonded at freshman year in medical school. And our families, the Wagoners, the Pyles, and the Millers socialized, some, with maybe some others in their class. They had one of their classmates here came down from Fayetteville, is that right, Hoyte? Lindsay Miller, would you? There's the wife of one of their classmates, Marcia Leckie, is here. She was married to Paul Leckie and later married to Kelsey Kaplinger, who in the same class. Our first son was born in 1963. He was a bit early. He decided he's going to come early. He was supposed to wait another year at least. Raymond was eventually accepted to medical school and did well, but then he decided toward the end of his medical education that he wanted to go into OBGYN, and he wanted to deliver babies and take care of mommies. The head of that department at the time would not let black medical students examine women. As I remember, Raymond said they could examine a woman on any other service except that one. Well, he got angry and backed off and applied to Case Western Reserve, and we sold a house we had bought, and he was going to go to Case Western, and it entered Joe Bates. There are 2 stories about that. Raymond told me that Joe asked him to go into internal medicine. Joe says Raymond approached him, whichever way. Joe was a mentor, a magnificent mentor for African Americans, and certainly Raymond. Raymond did an internal medicine residency and a pulmonary disease subspecialty because of Joe Bates. Our second child, who's here, was born in 1967. And I back up, and Hoyte has mentioned the Berry Plan. Raymond got to finish all of his training before he left, and he struggled to get assigned to Walter Reed. He thought he was going to have to go to Vietnam. Turns out he didn't, with help of a local patient of his and John McClellan. I have letters that he wrote to John McClellan, and he was assigned to Walter Reed. And while at Walter Reed, he sat as a pulmonary doctor for Eisenhower. Now, no, who am I trying to say? I've lost the name who went before him. Jim Adamson was in that slot. And Jim was ahead of Raymond in medical school. Raymond went to Walter Reed and took that same slot. So that's how he was assigned to sit with him.
I didn't interrupt you. Both Jim Adams and Raymond Miller were assistant chiefs of the pulmonary service at Walter Reed.
I did not remember that Raymond was assistant chief. He was on that service. And Hoyte has already told this story, that they invited us to dinner. I'm going to add a little bit. They were at Quantico while Raymond was at Walter Reed. And then, I hope I don't slip up and say we, because back then, that's what we said. We were in medical school, you know. But he invited us over, and I just asked him recently if he had thought about going in practice with Raymond. And I told Raymond, he said, no, he didn't. And just that day, he decided he wanted to. He said he was my best friend, and I knew he was going to practice like I wanted to. And that's how that happened. And I still think that both of these guys, well, all four of them were a bit naive. And it went well. It really did. And there were some minor issues, but nothing really large. The practice moved along quite quickly. I'm going to let Bob tell the story about that first check, how much it was. You know, yeah, well, I can tell you what you told me. Yeah. But the Pyles had 2 children. We had 2. All the Wagoners had 4. You know.
Let's move on to Dr. Moore.
What do you want to know?
Now, you too were from Little Rock.
That's
and,
right.
You had a father that had views about this, I think.
Beg your pardon?
Your father had.
My stepfather.
So I'll let you tell that story and then whatever else you'd like to add.
Well, I was a Little Rock native, and I think that was one of our advantages, was Hoyte and I had grown up and lived in Little Rock a long time. We had family connections here. And then Jack's father was in business here in insurance. And so we had some advantages in making that decision. Whether there was opposition within the family, in my instance, it was limited. However, my father died when I was 8, and my mother remarried when I was a junior in high school. And she married a man who owned a large farm in eastern Pulaski County. And he had a number of employees, and I went to live with my mother and him out in rural Pulaski County, where there were about 1,500 acres of a large farm. And there were, on that property, buildings known as the quarters, where African-American employees lived, and they were unpainted shotgun-type houses. But my stepfather was a very kind man, and when I proposed going into practice with the other 3 doctors, the only opposition I had was, I don't think that's a good idea. But nobody slammed a fist down and said, no, you can't do that. So it went, I think, from that family perspective, quite well. And in the course of the years, my stepfather developed some illnesses, and he wound up as Raymond's patient, and a very grateful patient. So mindsets can be changed, hearts can be changed. And
Bob, tell some stories about the practice and some of the difficult encounters you might have had with patients or on call and so forth.
hardly any, frankly. It was remarkable to me how accepting the medical and the non-medical community was and were. I don't remember much in the way of any significant opposition, and it went remarkably smoothly from my perspective. The medical community welcomed us, as Ray's letter said, with open arms. And the only thing I can remember is an anecdotal story that one very conservative member of the Arkansas legislature came for some reason to our clinic and refused to be helped by one of our black employees who was a receptionist. And he told her, no, you can't help me. But I don't remember any other really significant incidents.
Sure, I have one story.
Raymond, I wanted to say that Raymond was really full of interesting, there are interesting stories about him. And there was a point in time when my wife and I enjoyed doing things like going out and camping out and cooking out while camping out. And we proposed to Raymond that he might enjoy doing that. He said, no, thank you. I camped out for the first 18 years of my life. He didn't want to do that again. Excuse me, Joe. What did you want to ask?
I think Clarice has a story to tell.
Oh, okay.
Bertha Burton, who died just recently, was the nurse, and Bertha said, in the very beginning, in the afternoons, at the end of the day, they would get a list of the patients that they were supposed to see the next day. Jack got the list and realized one patient had been taken away from Raymond, and he asked why. And the employee said he didn't want to see a black doctor. And Jack was very soft-spoken. Bertha said he raised his voice and said, well, you tell them we don't do that at this clinic. He'll have to go somewhere else. And the employee said, I can't do that. And he said, well, you're fired if you don't. And Hoyte has another story that I think is really interesting about the patient from Memphis. You remember? Okay.
Raymond came to me when we first went and practiced and said, Hoyte, if there's ever a racial issue, you come get me. Well, all the years we were in practice, I never had to go get him. Knew I wouldn't. But anyway, we hadn't been in practice very long, and we would take call in the emergency room for anyone that came in that didn't have a doctor and had an internal medicine problem. And all the internists in Little Rock would rotate through and take call. Well, it was Raymond's turn to take call one night, and this man was admitted with a heart attack. Raymond went up to see him, and he could tell that this white person was very dissatisfied with having to have a black doctor take care of him. But he went ahead and took his history and examined him and was very professional, like Raymond always is. And there was a telephone right there by the patient's bed. And so after he examined him, he sat down to dictate the history and physical. And he started off and said, this 62-year-old arrogant white male comes in with a heart attack. And then he went ahead and finished dictating history and physical. Well, when that patient was discharged from the hospital, he had fallen in love with Raymond during the time that Raymond took care of him in the hospital. And after he went home, he lived in Memphis, Tennessee. He drove over every year to get his physical examination from Raymond. Wouldn't let anybody else do it. That's how Raymond was able to handle racial issues.
We're running sort of late on time. I'd like to leave the remaining time for questions and comments from anyone in the audience. Yes, sir.
This is really just a comment. This is a very interesting story that you all have told. I wish it could be cast. I'm glad you all are doing this on video. But it's a story. Please look at the space and time.
Yeah. So
He had a microphone.
Sir, let me give you a microphone.
I think my voice would have carried anyway, but this is just a very interesting story, and I hope that at some point maybe somebody can get some of this down and write. Even the comments about the tuberculosis treatment over historically. We're in such crazy times these days. Sometimes it's good to remember where we've come from. I personally find us in very troubled times these days. And so when I hear about kind of our journey, how we've gotten to this point, maybe it gives me hope that things aren't as bad as I really think they are. I appreciate you all's story this evening.
Any other comments or questions?
After
Take your mask off, will you please? Yes.
After all of you got established in that practice, what was the ripple effect in terms of similar developments in other areas? You've mentioned OB-GYN, pediatrics, family medicine. Did you find that the other practices began to break down some of those barriers in terms of who they brought into their practices?
I don't know exactly when, but the two Compurus doctors, one a cardiologist and one gastroenterologist, rather recently took in blacks. They were two guys from Pine Bluff. And I'm just guessing in the last 10 years, maybe less than that. So I think it was a long time before whites opened up their practices. But I'm not absolutely positive about that.
You know, we have a black medical society to this day and a white Arkansas medical society. For a long time, blacks weren't admitted to the Arkansas Medical Society. They are today. But that original Arkansas Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Association is active, a very productive group even today. One more point to make for me. I think there are about physicians, black physicians in Arkansas represent about 2% of the practicing physicians in our state. We have about 16% of our population are black. Our medical school gets no praise from me for being strong advocates for African Americans to enter and succeed and thrive in this medical school. No one had any comment about affirmative action. This is a story about affirmative action. Mr. Nutt, are we finished?
If no one else has any questions, we'll start winding up. Do y'all anyone have any additional comments you'd like to make before we? You'll think of it when you leave, okay. Dr. Moore, do you have anything you want to say? Dr. Pyle? Anything else you want to say? Okay. Dr. Bates? Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks to Dr. Bates for moderating the session. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Pyle, Clarice Miller, and Dr. Moore over here. This has been recorded. It will be uploaded to the Society's YouTube channel. If you'd like to get an email when that is uploaded, please feel free to leave your email on the sign-up sheet over there, and I'll let you know when it's up. And appreciate y'all being here. Thank you again for the panelists. And a couple of things I think I have mentioned to the panelists about the possibility of doing oral histories, going into a little bit further in depth about the story of the Little Rock Internal Medicine Clinic. And then another thing is my goal is to get the building on Lee Street designated as a national historic property in the National Register of Historic Properties.
Okay. a neurosurgeon bought that building probably about 2 years ago and has left it structurally intact. He has a practice there. He was going to try to come today, but he said Tuesday was his heavy day. But that is the greatest honor for a clinic that was designed 50 plus years ago to be bought, refurbished, and used by another doctor. Dr. Ali Raja is his name. And we're excited about that. They want us to put, in the process of trying to put a plaque on the building with the images of these 4 guys. We're having a hard time because the one picture we have of them was taken probably early October when they opened in 1970. Some of them in the shadows, and the artist thinks they can't do them justice, but we are going to keep trying. Yeah.
Well, I think we can all agree just how historically significant it was for the founding of the internal medicine clinic in 1970. Yeah, Phil.
I just had a comment, and it's something that's kind of been on my mind. I'd like to ask a question and make a comment. The school teacher interrupts the student. I know that each of you all have been, as well as Dr. Wagoner and my dad, have been very instrumental. I think I can speak for all the children in how we were raised. How conscious of an effort did you all put in influencing how we interacted together and how we might handle some of the challenges that you had gone through in this process?
Hoyte might not have understood. I was hoping he was going to say something. I'd like to say that all of our children, most of them, not all of them, served as weekday janitors. They had a custodian that they used to do the big jobs, but he was probably the second. Jack Wagoner Jr. was the first. Hoyte Remus? Hoyte Remus is back. Hold your hand up, Hoyte. Hoyte Pyle Jr. I don't remember. I don't think we thought about you all. That's a shame. Being very, very truthful. You were very young. We made the decision. They made the decision, really, because I don't remember Raymond asking me what I thought about it. You know, at all. The guys pretty much did it. But I don't think we thought about you all. I'm sorry. Yeah, we didn't. It worked out.
But Clarice, that sounds so true, because in my position, I wasn't worried about my children, what they thought.
No. Well, they were so young.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, they were very young.
I'm just saying that rings really true, because when we were raising our children, we weren't consulting what they thought. I mean, we were living our. I really think that rings true.
Yeah, well, I know it did for us. We didn't do that, and I just have to say that I don't remember. He might have Raymond asking me, "What do you think about it?" You know. And we were really naive, I think. We started building a house when we were still at Walter Reed and opening that practice. And it was just unreal. I had a lady that was in a civic organization with me. I was at her house for a meeting. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you afraid? Do you think you're going to be okay?" And my first thought was, and I didn't say it, I don't think we would do it if we didn't think we were going to be okay. Now, she was married to a guy that was a mortician. So black funeral homes, Margaret Freeman, you can answer, were not doing white people here at that time. I think it's been rather recent that that's happened. I do want to say one other thing. The gentleman in the back on the right, that's Wiley Branton Jr., and many of you probably know Wiley Sr. He was a part of that 1957. He was the lawyer locally for the integration of Central High School. And Wiley is a retired judge. Yeah. And I'm happy to see everybody here. You know, we put a list together, and I'm pleasantly surprised about the people that are here. Because they know Lula Brooks is a neighbor of mine. She's in the back. Her husband went to, correct me, Lula, if I'm wrong, went to pharmacy school here. And he's one of Raymond's best friends because they didn't have many friends. It was unusual for Hoyte Pyle. Marcia's second husband was closest, you know, to us. It's been a good life, though. It really has. And I appreciate all of you that came.
There's one person. Is Sam Taggart here? He was. Sam's a medical historian, a serious one. I thought you might make a comment about all this.
My only thought was that, my only thought about this was that when you were talking about this, when y'all started this, that Title IX passed in '72. A year and a half later after y'all started that, so that you could no longer, you were talking about getting more African Americans involved in medical school and medical training, that you can no longer, and this goes back to your point, Dr. Bates, that you can no longer discriminate based on gender or race. And that did have an impact. And I practiced for 40 years in Arkansas, and I saw the difference. I could see the difference in what happened in the practice of medicine. But Title IX, I think, also had an impact about that time and a little bit later.
Well, if there are no more comments or questions, I thank our panelists for their courage through the years and their